agriculture sectors and how they will adapt to the energy transition. Annual global investment in energy transition technologies has exceeded $1 trillion for the first time, hitting a new record level of 1.11 trillion in 2022 and recording a 31% yearly gain. Growing policy support and the increasing competitiveness of clean energy technologies continues to underpin a rapid acceleration in the energy transition. And this transition has matched that of fossil fuels for the first time. This came despite an uptick in spending for fossil fuels as many regions focused on shoring up energy security. However, the shift in investment towards clean energy is a historic change and one that is unlikely to be reversed. So what does this mean for finance and the investment required? Well, net zero comes at a cost, and investment must triple for the rest of the 2020s to get us on track for net zero. Energy transition and grid investment needs to average 4.55 trillion between now and 2030, 3 times that was spent in 2022. Across 2023 to 2030, electrified transport, renewable energy, and grids form the largest investment opportunities, accounting for 72% of the share, with a combined value of 4.17 trillion. But we cannot rest on our laurels. Ongoing ways to cooperate between the public and private sectors will be needed to continue to mobilize capital to these sectors. Thank you all for joining. Kishan, if I could start with you perhaps. I wanted to ask, how do you see development and progress in the energy transition in the Middle East compared to that with the rest of the world?
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure for United Nations Development Program to be here. I think the Middle East North Africa region has seen quite a lot of positive progress in recent years when it comes to the energy transition. So we have in this very hall, in this very convention center 1 year ago, the COP27 under the UN climate change process. And at that big event, important event, there was a big focus on trying to address the climate emergency, which is, as we have all seen in recent times, a particular challenge for the Middle East North Africa region. It's increasingly a global climate hotspot. We've seen climate emergencies expanding across the Middle East North Africa region. The exacerbation of the crisis in Libya recently is just one example. Protracted droughts over the last 10, 20 years, in fact, whether it's in North Africa or in the Middle East or in the Horn of Africa, the various parts of the MENA region, it's all very clear. So building resilience of communities, trying to secure those hard-won development gains, trying to prevent a reversal of poverty, increasing food insecurity, water insecurity, this is the goals for an energy transition. So unless there's a rapid transition, the root causes of the climate crisis, unfortunately, as we're seeing, this emergency will continue to take shape. So countries across the MENA region have increased their ambitions, actually, to be part of this global movement for an energy transition. Today, the Arab countries together have a goal of 30% renewable energy in the power mix of the MENA region by 2035. The Arab Sustainable Energy Strategy that's been enacted together by all the Arab countries a couple of years ago. Today, unfortunately, only approximately 7% of the power mix in the region is from renewable energy. So this is a challenge, but also an opportunity. The Arab region is expected to see maybe the world's biggest opportunity for renewable energy investment on the road to 2030. About 30% possibly of global renewable energy investment is here in the region, actually, because of this growing ambition. So what are the challenges? On one hand, one of the challenges are the incentives in a region that's still very much defined by oil and gas, with many, many oil and gas economies in the region. But we're starting to see this shift as well. As countries look to secure future energy exports and to reduce their own dependence on using oil and gas in their own countries, we're seeing an expansion of sustainable energy solutions, even in oil and gas economies of the region. Hundreds of billions of dollars of future oil and gas export revenues will be foregone unless this local transition happens. And so we're seeing huge new projects, some of the biggest projects in the world on renewables, of course, in the region, whether it's in Egypt, in UAE, KSA, Morocco, and the rest. Jordan, as one example, now is more than 30% of the power mix in the country is now from renewable energy, one of the energy import-dependent countries. So there's actually positive trends about a tenfold increase of renewable energy over the last decade, which has been a challenging decade in the Middle East, North Africa, to say the least. But despite this, countries are really looking at sustainable energy solutions as a core part of achieving energy security, economic resilience, combating social vulnerability. A second point I would make is that a number of countries in the region are, of course, fragile and crisis affected. Displaced communities, the region still has the world's largest number of refugees and IDPs. And so for countries like Yemen, like Syria, Libya, Palestine, Lebanon, etc., there's a big need to actually help reduce dependence on fossil fuel imports and build this resilience, social economic resilience, through actually including green solutions and renewable energy as part of building back and reconstruction. So that's also a very important agenda for our work at the United Nations with our country partners across the region.
Thank you, Kishan. I think I'm sort of taking from that the increased ambition that countries need to develop and what incentives are in place are really going to help to drive things forward. Abdul Hamid, I guess that falls into your territory from an IPP. I was interested in understanding a little bit more as to the key takeaways that you have to investing in the Middle East. What did you find to be some of the key drivers as a sponsor to investing in renewable energy? And what have been some of those challenges that you've encountered?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, AIB, for hosting us here in this amazing and excellent event. So just to give a bit of background, we have been very active in the region. In the last 20 years, we've been able to build up a portfolio of around 50 gigawatt, and almost 47% of that is actually renewable. When it comes to your specific question, I think I will be focusing on the three main points, really. The first point is clarity on the pipeline. When we go and invest on this project, it's important to have a clarity on the pipeline. And the pipeline is very, very important for large developers around the world to come and invest in countries. Big developers will be reluctant to actually go and do a single project or 2 or 3 projects in a specific country, as long as there is a clear pipeline for 5-10 years that motivate people to invest in the country, build their own offices, create a full infrastructure supply chain, and to go invest in these countries. The second really important point for the developers, including Aquapower, is actually the partnership spirit. We have seen different off-takers takes different views when it comes to the challenges that the off-takers, the developers are actually facing in the countries. I'll give you an example. During COVID-19, the way that different off-takers has been exposed and responded to these events has definitely impacted the forward-looking for these developers on these countries. Some developers has been seeking this consent from the off-takers, and the off-taker in a very partnership spirit accepted and supported and gave the green way forward for these developers, which made it a win-win situation, not only for the developer, but also for the pipeline going forward. So that is definitely a very important and critical point for developers to continue investing in these countries. At the end, it has to be commercially driven and not politically driven to make sustainable long-term partnership. The third point is the clarity on the policy making. We have seen, and I can also give you another example, 2 different countries we are operating in. One country, in 10 years, we have done only 2 projects due to the, let's say there is no single point that can actually decide on the way forward, but you have to go around to 6, 7 different ministers to make the decision on these specific projects. So you end up investing 10 years with 2 projects only. Whereas the other country, in 4 years, you end up with 10 projects because there is a clear empowerment to the Ministry of Energy, a clear visibility, and clear execution pathway. For us, definitely, when you invest in money first, and also you invest with time. Time is essential, and it's important to have a clarity on the way forward, and it's also important to have the right partnership spirit for these projects.
Okay. In terms of some of those technologies that you think are going to be the technologies driving forward for Aqua Power in terms of that pipeline, could you give us an idea as to what some of those are?
In the last maybe few years, we have been projects, we are seeing the pipeline of the countries we are working on. Almost out of 10 projects, 8 on renewable and 2 on gas. Just the same country 7 years ago, it was actually, if it's 10 projects, it will be 8 in gas and 2 in renewable. So we have seen the flip side, and this is a natural move due to actually, we in this region, we are actually behind when it comes to adaptation to the sustainable program or the renewable. We came late, but better come late than never. I think we have been building up on the competitiveness of these renewable tariffs that allowed such, let's say, sector of renewable to be complementing to the full energy mix that we have in these countries. We are doing a renewable project not because it's a mandate for us, but we are doing it because it's commercially making sense. It's actually came in the right time and the right pricing for us. So definitely we are seeing more renewable, I would say in this part of the world, more PV, solar. We are seeing also wind in other locations in the region. And also, as you know, the green hydrogen has been just tapped into, which is now we have 2 projects of them as well.
Okay, thank you. I was interested to what you said about policy and obviously the supporting mechanisms that need to be in place. Obviously hugely important, and Vari, I guess from your perspective, it'd be interesting to understand some examples of successful cases that have utilized those legal, regulatory and policy frameworks to facilitate the energy transition moving forward. Perhaps you could give a couple of examples from an energy and a transport perspective for projects that you've worked on.
Yes, of course, and thank you for having me to the IIB. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. In terms of policies, laws, regulations, indeed, those can facilitate, but they can also potentially limit projects as well. And when we're looking at, let's firstly consider renewables, the approach, I would say, is a tale of 2 approaches. The GCC countries, the hydrocarbon producing countries in the Middle East, and those that aren't, and in particular those that are energy dependent, such as Jordan. So we've seen 2 very different approaches. The GCC has been very successful in its renewables drive, but it's been a drive over the last 10 to 15 years that has been a rapid rise, and it's been done without having any really specific renewable laws for utility scale projects. What it's relied upon, I would say, is the successful track record of IPPs, of independent power projects, that have been very successful over the years in the region. And so it's the IPP laws that are followed, in addition to the IPP contractual framework, which was tried and tested, like by developers, like by sponsors, and like by the banks, so that always helps. It's come off the back of very ambitious renewables targets from those countries as well, and also a need to diversify, not necessarily for energy security, but because there's an opportunity cost for using natural gas for power generation when they could actually be selling it on the market. So there's obviously a big drive there for the GCC countries. Also, I think it's worth noting as well that these projects, they've got off the ground without subsidies, and unlike the conventional projects, the conventional IPPs that went before them, many of them have not had any kind of government or sovereign guarantees. And so they've been extremely successful. They've had very low tariffs, often record-breaking tariffs. And in addition to that, these projects have often been upsized. And by that, I don't mean your Happy Meal, but I mean these projects, say, have been tendered for 500 megawatts, and all of a sudden you're looking at something that's 1,200 and as much as 2,000 even. So these projects are on a massive scale in the GCC. It's looking slightly differently, however, in terms of distributed solar. Before I move away from the GCC countries, we do actually have more of a framework that applies, a legislative framework for distributed solar, so for CNI, so for conventional industrial solar, as well as rooftop solar. And the CNI market's quite different because it's based on a net metering regime. And as a result, what that means is that it's not possible to sell to a third party because these countries all have a single buyer model. You can only sell essentially to the state off-taker, and it's done on a net metering basis for the power that's not used. So that actually limits the potential for CNI for distributed solar in most of the GCC countries. There are some limited exceptions, but that's the general practice. There's also, the regulations also limit the size of these projects, so that's another limiting factor. So net metering plus limited in size, and in some cases it's also the type of distributed solar is also limited. So for example, in Dubai it's limited, you can't have ground-based distributed solar. So let's look at the countries outside the GCC and how regulation has actually helped renewables. If we look at Jordan, if we look at Egypt, they both have renewable energy laws, and under those laws they both have regimes, a reference pricing regime or a feed-in tariff regime, a FIT regime, and they've been extremely successful in banking projects in what's been quite difficult political climates and quite difficult economic climates. They've brought with them financing from IFIs, multilaterals, and they've managed to, bank a number of projects, solar and wind projects. In addition to that, I would say, so again, different from what we've seen in the GCC countries, the distributed sector, they're allowed to have wheeling, so they can have both net metering and wheeling. Wheeling means that they can actually sell to other private consumers, so they don't just have to have the energy go back into the grid, the excess energy. They can have direct PPAs or corporate PPAs with third parties. So quite different regimes, both successful in their own way. And I think what it shows is that regulation and law is extremely important and can facilitate the development of the energy transition, and in this case renewables. But also equally policies can, so it doesn't always have to be in the form of regulation. I think we're going to talk about hydrogen a bit later, but that again is going to be, I think, an extremely important driver, both in terms of regulation but also policy.
Yeah, I think you're completely correct in terms of those policies and incentives needing to be in place. Konstantin, let's come to you from an AIIB perspective. I guess we've heard from each of the panelists so far from a humanitarian perspective, from Kishan, looking at the pipeline and opportunities, and then that regulatory side from Vahi. The AIIB is a growing multilateral development bank established in 2016 with the vision of investing into the infrastructure of tomorrow. How has this vision been translated into your support for the energy transition in the countries in your territory?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this wonderful question. First of all, allow me to say how I am pleased to be part of this panel and to see so many familiar faces of the clients, partners, and friends. So thank you very much for coming and supporting and coming to the seminar. Indeed, the concept of transition is deeply embedded, and it's a first and foremost concept in our energy, in our infrastructure for tomorrow concept. We see that the future infrastructure should be primarily, first of all, sustainable. So, since its inception, AIB financed, our board approved just 50 projects in the energy sector, and most of that as an renewable and associated infrastructure. I would like to say that the very first project in the renewable sector we did less than a year after establishment, and it actually was the Binban solar in Egypt. And ever since then, we were really looking and focused on the sector. Here in Middle East, we are in the Middle East here for the session. We are focused on the development of the renewables, but also in associated infrastructure as well. And one of the problems, common problems among all of our, especially emerging market clients, which we can see, is that the development of renewables is going far ahead of the associated infrastructure development. So, and that is why we are looking at the situation holistically and trying to balance, and therefore a big proportion of our portfolio is also in transmission and distribution. But we are also financing the large-scale renewables. Actually, renewable development in any shapes and forms, really, from the utility scale to the rooftop solutions. We also are normally in all the markets and in the Middle East, especially looking at the financing the smaller scale projects through the financial intermediaries. And I wanted to mention our late last year we signed and invested into the Alcazar fund, which I've seen the managing partner who informed us today that the pipeline is very strong and they are almost invested. So it again shows how active the market is. It's not only about renewables. Our focus on the energy transition in the Middle East. It's also the EV transportation and some new technologies, development and application. It is really very interesting to know that the very famous quote that 50% or less, more than 50% of the technologies required for this transition, energy net zero achievement is yet to be commercialized, yet to be developed, in fact. And we are actively looking at this sphere as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think certainly not any slides that I've got today, but certainly looking at electrolyzer production out to 2030, we've got huge ambitions, but a lot of non-applicable dates as to when those projects are potentially going to come into fruition. So opportunity, but still a bit of work to do. Thank you so far. Really interesting in terms of your views and opinions. In the second part of the session, we're going to discuss and drill down a little bit further into the technologies that are driving the energy transition in the region. So less mature technologies are really starting to scale, such as hydrogen and CCS. And the costs of existing technologies are becoming much more competitive over the next 20 years, providing a number of opportunities for many. Investment, as you can see from the slide, in clean hydrogen more than tripled in 2022 to 1.1 billion, making it one of the fastest growing sectors within the energy transition. In addition, the carbon removal sector is booming, with over 1.3 billion invested alone in direct air capture through venture capital and project finance initiatives in 2022. Abdullah Hamid, we can't get away from not talking about probably one of the biggest projects in the region, but Aquapower, via your joint venture with Air Products and NEOM, are involved in the delivery of the green hydrogen project at NEOM. And this would be, when complete, the world's largest green hydrogen to ammonia facility. Can you tell us a little bit more about this project, and what are some of the key end user markets that you see for hydrogen within the region?
Thank you. So just to give the audience also a bit of background of this project, so this is around $8.5 billion green hydrogen project that is being built in NEOM right now. It is under construction. We have achieved the financial close a few months ago with the Air Product and NEOM City. It's a project that will be using around 4 gigawatts of renewable, both PV and wind, and it will produce around 1.2 million ton of green ammonia. Of course, just to also, most of the users and the audience maybe will not know how much is 1.2 million ton of green ammonia, and just to put it into perspective, so if you use it in the transportation industry, this is kind of eliminating 700,000 cars of CO2 emission. So that is kind of the level of use. Before we go to the applications of it, it's important, you have mentioned this is the largest green hydrogen project. So who believed in it, right? So it's important to talk about how do you structure it. It's very essential to understand that we have intentionally worked almost for 2 years together with our partners to make sure that it is actually a feasible project. And by doing so, we wanted that project to be fully supported by the lenders. So we have more than 26 different lenders have been accepted to be part of this project, mostly in a non-recourse basis. So basically, they are taking the risk of the project, and only the equity partners, equity financiers are taking the risk of the sponsors. So that is a big and significant kind of achievement, because the minute you talk a project that is corporate financing, it is kind of a short circle of people who believed on it. But the minute you introduce 26 different lenders from all over the world believing in the same story, it makes commercial sense. With that also, we have a full offtake. So the Air Product is guaranteeing a long-term offtake on this project, which makes it a bit unique project as compared to the previously green hydrogen projects that has been built around the world. This project will have different applications. So we are producing green hydrogen. Ultimately, will be also converted to green ammonia for transport. So we are building the port, and it will be shipped to different markets depending on the off-taker need. The off-taker will decide on the final destination, but it is mainly Europe and Japan, we expect. Different applications of the green ammonia or also the green hydrogen, whether in the fertilizer business, in the transportation, infrastructure, decarbonization of the industries like the steel and others. So massive market upcoming for that. This is just a start of our business model when it comes to believing in the green hydrogen. We have already actually signed another pilot project in Uzbekistan, and we are signing multiple projects, MOUs, different countries that we are operating in, with the target to expand our green hydrogen. We are targeting within the next 8 to 10 years to build much more than just you have seen, which is the green hydrogen of NEOM.
Interesting about Uzbekistan. Do you see hydrogen hubs, so to speak, supporting efficiency more in total, so to speak?
No, it is a valid question, and that's why we are starting with a pilot. So what we are doing in Uzbekistan, we have a 50 megawatt pilot project that we will start on. It's mainly a wind farm that will be using the green energy from there to produce green ammonia. Also, interesting fact that while some countries will not have a sea access, they already have a built-in piping access, and you can use the same piping that is being used for gas to be used for the green ammonia. So that is going to be an interesting factor to test, pilot for 2 years before we go and launch a large project for the green hydrogen in Uzbekistan.
Fantastic. Vari, let's come back to you, and Abdulhamid touched on some of the end users for hydrogen. From your perspective, what are the regulatory, contractual challenges that you see on a day-to-day basis?
So we're seeing quite a lot of challenges. A lot of it's because there simply isn't regulation. And in a way, we almost have to work backwards. So Abdulhamid said something I think that is extremely important for NEOM, which was that they have a full guaranteed offtake. And that's, I think, critical, but equally not always going to be possible. And so I think we have sort of three critical questions to ask: where, what, and how. Where is this hydrogen going to go? Where are the markets? Where is it going to be used? What kind of hydrogen molecule is it going to end up as? And how is it going to get there? So where, what, how. Unless you've got a captive project, in other words, where you have a hydrogen project in situ, say a green steel plant, something like that, those three questions are going to be critical for the project to be bankable. I think if you have a captive, it's a very different risk allocation and probably a lot simpler to bank. If we're looking at where, let's maybe take a step back, looking at green hydrogen. What is green hydrogen? Well, we all probably have an answer to that, but it may not always be the same. And so the standards and a lack of common standards is actually quite critical. So if we look at Europe, we have RED 2, where there are actually standards in place and various requirements such as additionality and so on that have to be complied with. Why am I talking about Europe when we're sitting in Egypt, and also when we're talking about the Middle East? Well, if you're looking at the Middle East, two main export markets, one is Europe-bound and the other is going to be Asia-bound, in particular to Korea and Japan. So you also need to comply with the regulations in the end country. So that's when we get to the where. So if the hydrogen is bound for Europe, then it's going to need to comply with the requirements in Europe. If it's bound for Asia, it's going to need to comply with the requirements in the relevant country. And those are sort of under development. So there's big question marks as to where they're going to get to, say in Japan and in Korea. But we already have, at least for now, quite detailed requirements and know what those are for the EU. So these need to be complied with. That's in addition to whatever the requirements are in the country of production. Now, we can have some of the production locally and used locally, produced locally and used locally, but at the moment it's still quite limited. I would say in the last year or two there's been more awareness as to hydrogen being used locally within the Middle East, so that it's not all export bound, but equally the majority of it is intended to be export bound, and so it's really important to understand those regulations that apply in the export countries. Domestically, I would say in the Middle East, the issue is that we have a whole plethora of sort of ad hoc policies, limited regulation and so on. And so there's an opportunity for countries to talk and try and come up with some common standards, not just what is green hydrogen, but around the whole sort of life cycle of hydrogen. And that's extremely important because these projects are complex. So not just a power project, and certainly shouldn't be treated as such. They're a lot more multifaceted than that. So the regulatory side of it is quite critical, I would say, for ensuring that you're going to have a project that is not just bankable, but that actually works. Talking about then, so let's look at the where, the market that you're looking at, then the what kind of hydrogen is it that's being delivered to the end user, and who's going to buy it, who's the off-taker. So what kind of hydrogen? At the moment there's a lot of talk on ammonia. If you're looking at other types of hydrogen molecules, say methane, then you need carbon to combine with it. And if it's going to be green hydrogen, then that carbon is going to have to be green as well. So there may be limited opportunities as to where you're going to get that green carbon from. So it's not as simple as just saying you can combine it with other molecules to create a green product, because everything that's combined will need to be green. In terms of off-takers, as I mentioned at the start, there is a real challenge on that front, because off-takers are saying, look, we can't take all the risk. And so that's why I said it's not just a power project, because I think a lot of people, particularly in the Middle East, are used to having an off-take model where the government takes or pays, essentially, for the power. But we can't necessarily expect that of an off-taker. So that's the challenge there. So we've had the where, the what, the how is it going to get to the market? So if hydrogen molecules, in whatever guise it is, let's say it's ammonia, how is it going to get to the market? I think from the Middle East in particular, you're going to be looking at shipping, and that means there needs to be a lot of investment in infrastructure, in port infrastructure, as well as in terms of vessels, potentially retrofitting vessels and so on. For some countries, a long track record, say, of LNG and so on, they're quite hopeful that they can use that as a model and be successful on that basis. Equally, however, I think there's still a lot to be done in terms of understanding exactly how hydrogen is going to get to the market. Regulation can help, but there's a lot more to it than that. So yeah, the where, the what, and the how.
Okay, thank you. And I guess that comes back a little bit to Konstantin's point around the infrastructure investment as well that's needed outside of the technologies. Kishan, let's come back to yourself, sir. From a perspective of the UNDP, what is the potential for green hydrogen that you see in the Middle East, and are there specific development programs supporting countries' transition goals?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I mean, as the UN Development Program, we're the UN's largest implementer of grant assistance to countries around the world for climate action. So we currently have close to $500 million of grants in the Middle East, North Africa region specifically for countries in this region for advancing climate action. And so some of the things we do, for example, the last couple of years, enhancing national climate plans, or what are called the NDCs, in advance of the COP27 last year and COP26 before that, but also national energy strategies. So one of the key points that's been discussed in the panel today, which is one of the, let's say, barriers or one of the areas for need when it comes to capacity development, is indeed in national policies, regulations, legal frameworks, and that's something that we specifically collaborate with our countries, partner countries, is on getting the energy transition policies, strategies, legal frameworks right. So that's one area. Secondly is on institutions, helping develop new institutions, helping to build the capacity of existing institutions. We helped develop, for example, collaborating with the government to establish something called the Saudi Energy Efficiency Center in Saudi Arabia over the years, which is one of the good examples in the region on trying to advance new energy transition policies and solutions. The Lebanon Green Investment Facility in Lebanon, trying to scale up low carbon energy transition and solutions. The Dubai Carbon Center of Excellence in Dubai, which is also a platform for taking action on developing new policies, but also putting in place new breakthrough technologies. So I think the point of not just policies and regulations, but actually creating, building the capacity and creating new institutions that are needed for this, for the future, looking forward for this transformation. And so specifically when it comes to technologies, of course, we're supporting countries on various types of technologies, not just green hydrogen, but also, for example, on energy efficiency. This region is seeing a rapid expansion of air conditioning because it's seeing record heat waves, and the temperatures are, the forecasts for the future are quite severe. And so this is a big drain on energy, of course, on the electricity grid. So breakthrough expansion of energy efficient air conditioning, for example, in commercial, industrial, obviously residential as well, is one of the specific technologies that's in focus. When it comes to hydrogen, I think the vast majority still is not green, of course, whether it's globally or regionally. So I think that's an important point to make generally in the session, is that it's a very small share that actually is green hydrogen still at the moment. So definitely a huge challenge to actually put in place those policies, centers of excellence on green hydrogen, specifically in the region, lack of capacity generally across the region. To actually increase that share of the hydrogen market and green hydrogen. It's, as we all know, the world's most water insecure region, the most water poor region of the world. And so that's one of the main feedstocks, obviously, for producing green hydrogen. Hydrogen in general is water. So not exactly an easy task in many countries, depending. Solar desal is still quite a rare commodity in the region. A great example in NEOM, obviously, but definitely not the rule of the game across the region. So I think there's an important point to be made about trade-offs, balancing water insecurity in a given community, especially if it's meant for producing green hydrogen for export market to Europe or elsewhere, balancing that between local water security needs and other needs, including energy security needs. So I think there's a lot to be done still in terms of one thing that's coming up quite soon, maybe by end of this year or early next year, is the MENA green hydrogen strategy. The Arab hydrogen strategy that's being developed by the 20 countries, Arab countries across the region. And this is important to set this kind of enabling policy framework across the region, actually, so countries can learn from each other indeed, but also the connectivity between countries across the region in particular.
Thank you. So, yeah, that policy framework is really critical and the backbone moving forward. Constantine, as we look at the role that the finance plays here, how does the AIB's role to catalyze private sector participation, especially for investment into new technologies such as hydrogen, how does that work?
Thank you. It works with the challenges, and obviously, having said that, I would like to say that we at AIB are strong believers in the future of the hydrogen as the main future fuel for the green energy. And nevertheless, in most of our client countries, in addition to what Mairi said about the challenges with the regulation and the contracting, there's clear issues with the cost of production and the transportation, and that is these are remaining today a major challenges. You have to have a scale of NEOM in order to make sure that it's viable and competing. So what we do and how it works? Yes, indeed. We try in two directions. We look at the development of the further development of the technologies, and here I would mention that we are ready to invest equity in the venture more funds working in this area of the new technologies for energy applications. And what comes to my mind is the new capital investment, which is the asset manager focused on investments into the into the transition and digitalization technologies. Similar projects which we will be prepared to further support and look, which is also diversifying our risk in this fairly risky investments. The other direction is we are trying to scale up and to do the pioneering projects, individual projects. And today my team is working on several of them in Oman, in Egypt, in Turkey, and China. And we are quite excited to work also with our Chinese colleagues who are quite advanced there in the area, but with everybody else as well. So these are the main two directions for us to attract the private sector capital into the infrastructure space. I also wanted to say that the AIB is going to launch very soon the Infratech platform, which would be also the resource for the exchange of the knowledge and experience within the infratech areas, and it's going to be launched very soon. Thank you.
Well, you heard it here first. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts so far. I think, as we've discussed, there are certainly opportunities for everybody, but a number of challenges for us all to overcome. I wanted to ask a question to all of you as a starting point. What do you think the biggest challenges are for achieving net zero moving forward? I know that's a big question, but Vi, let's start with you.
Gosh, I wish I had that crystal ball and how to overcome it. I think for me, the biggest challenge is collaboration. And by that, I mean collaboration at all levels. Obviously, we know that there's discussions at a state level and relative buy-in, but obviously by no means is it unanimous. But also collaboration in the private sector as well, as to how to help drive it forward. And if we look on a sector-by-sector basis, the challenges do differ radically. So if you're looking at the aviation sector versus, say, the maritime sector, they actually have very different challenges in terms of driving forward net zero. So I think collaboration is extremely important, and that can be facilitated by regulation, by incentives, and so on. I don't want to get into talk about subsidies because I don't think that's necessarily the way forward, but in terms of governments and policies, as we've already discussed, I do think they can help drive things forward. But yeah, collaboration for me is one of the biggest challenges.
Anybody else? Abdul Hamid?
I can add to that actually. I think people is the biggest challenge, to be honest, when it comes to the achieving the target and net zero by 2050 or 2060 in some countries. Look, I think at the end today we have discussed earlier that commercially it starts to make sense. So it is something that a lot of organizations will start moving to that direction. But building the right resources to execute all these different projects around the world is requiring a really great talent. So definitely talent acquisition is very important. People tend to be resisting of the change, and bringing the right talent to the right place to execute these projects will be a challenging exercise. And also it is linked to the same point, because at the end collaboration requires people mindset to be together. So definitely it's required all the people. So definitely the biggest risk will be people.
So when you say the people, is this talking to sort of localization when you're talking about projects and employment and working with local partners? Is that what you mean?
Both sides. So the first point is, to execute a pipeline of projects, you require people, you require funding, and you require actually the pipeline of project to be there. So today, I think countries have very clearly demonstrated what is their net zero targets. Is it 2050 or is it 2060? So the pipeline is there. You have a full clarity on the way forward. When it comes to funding, and with the support of AIB and other lenders, both ECAs as well are there. So funding also can be brought on the right timing with this competitiveness to deliver this project. Bringing people to that kind of pipeline, bring them to that development, to bring them the right talent. It's a challenging exercise. We are facing it, and I'm sure others are as well facing it as well.
And Kishan, in terms of a lot of the work that you do is development, looking at writing papers, showcasing where opportunities lie within geographies. Are there particular countries that you think are struggling in their ambitions towards net zero, or are there others that are doing better than others?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some good movers, fast movers, let's say. I mean, in the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa region, Jordan is now up to more than 30% of its power mix from renewables, which has been a very recent story, actually. Morocco is going to shoot for 40 to 50%, over the next couple of decades. So Palestine is also one of the places with a very high percentage. Yemen has a higher percentage of renewable energy in its power mix, even compared to the GCC countries. It's as a percentage of power mix, So actually, there's some interesting examples of countries in the region where, for various reasons, some good, some bad, countries have started to have an increasing share of their mix. I mean, on your last question, of course, one of the barriers to really achieving net zero is that, of course, we're seeing quite a significant scale-up of oil and gas consumption. Obviously production and consumption globally, and production in this region in particular. And so that's increasing. Today, the amount of carbon in the atmosphere is the most that there's been in about 3 million years. Last time there was this much carbon in the atmosphere, Antarctic was a tropical rainforest 3 million years ago. Another interesting stat is the amount of carbon that's being put into the atmosphere over the last 50 years. The amount of heat, extra heat that's been trapped in the atmosphere during the last 50 years is the equivalent of 26 billion nuclear bombs in terms of the heat generated by 25 billion nuclear bombs, according to some recent studies. So the amount of heat that's being trapped in the atmosphere is, of course, just the beginning, unless we really can try to implement these net zero policies, really try to bend the curve of global emissions. At the moment, there's still a big focus on investments into oil and gas and expansion of oil and gas consumers and producers. And I think that that's a major challenge and a major barrier to achieving net zero, of course, at the moment.
Maybe staying on that sort of theme around oil and gas a little bit, we hear a lot of things around nature-based solutions. As companies look to act on the energy transition, demand for carbon offsets generated from nature-based solutions is increasing. What are the challenges that need to be overcome to accelerate sort of solutions such as this?
Yeah, I mean, I think nature-based solutions is a key part of the mix of green solutions, tools that we have in the toolbox for addressing this. So the first thing is, last December, the new global biodiversity framework was enacted at Biodiversity COP15. And so that sets a new target of protecting ecosystems around the world, up to 30%, if I recall the statistics, in both marine and terrestrial ecosystems. And that's the point being that there's a need to halt and reverse the destruction of ecosystems, whether it's forests, whether it's marine ecosystems, the kind of ecosystems that for millions of years has been, of course, sequestering the carbon from the atmosphere. The oceans, just as one example, about 1/3 of the world, of the Earth's, the carbon from the atmosphere gets sequestered into the oceans, into those underwater forests. But unfortunately, these ecosystems are facing possible extinction, actually, in the coming decades. So there's a big pressure on ecosystems. One thing that we're doing as the United Nations Development Program is to expand our cooperation across the MENA region on nature-based solutions. Here in Egypt, just for example, during COP27 and even COP28, we've launched off the coast, if any of you get a chance while you're here in Egypt. There are some very important, very globally unique coral reef ecosystems and marine ecosystems in the Red Sea that are very important sequesters of carbon historically, but that are under tremendous pressure. So these are, we have new programming in the Red Sea in particular to actually protect the marine ecosystems, but equally important are the land-based ecosystems in places like the Atlas Mountains in Algeria and Morocco that are increasingly under pressure from forest fires and droughts. So protecting these key ecosystems in the region will really be an important part, apart from infrastructure and technology.
Thank you. Well, maybe it's time to open up to the floor for some questions. Maybe you'd like to hear a different voice than mine asking some questions. If anybody's got any questions, please raise your hand. We've got some microphones coming around. Please maybe just start with an introduction as to who you are, where you're from, and then ask your question from there.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for a very interesting, very informative panel. My name is Abel Abdelatif. I'm from Egypt, and I'm in charge of a big economic think tank in Egypt. Okay, I have two quick questions. The first one is about desalination and the need for desalination in GCC. And of course, you mentioned the water scarcity issue, very serious one. Desalination projects are very energy intensive. And all the investments in the renewable projects, it's not clear if this is going to be enough to accommodate the need for the desalinated water for this region. So this is a big challenge on the future. So I was wondering what you guys think of this. This is my first question. My second question is actually about Egypt and about the green hydrogen and its potential in the Suez Canal economic zone. And where you see that, because you're having very big investment in NEON, so I'm just wondering if you're doing anything in Egypt, because I know that there is a very big effort in this area, and there is the ease of the transportation, and there is room for storage, and et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Abdulhamid, why don't we start with you and then
Yeah,
go from there?
sure. Actually, a very interesting question. Just to give you a bit of reference point for you. When one of the first few projects we did in Saudi for the water desal, we used to have 20, we used for each meter cube of water, we used to use 22 kilowatt hour. Hello? So that's the consumption. Today, in our last project, if you can just give a reference, what do you think the 22 kilowatt hour per meter cube, what will it be today? You know how much is it today? 2.87. So we have been able to reduce the kilowatt hour consumption on the meter cube by 87%. So that is a significant and remarkable kind of change. And this is actually led by this region. The water desalination business has been led by this region. And it's important now to capture this learning in developing more water desalination plants within the region. So definitely, there was a much bigger crisis and requirement in different parts of the world. I think Saudi and UAE have no other source but desal today. And that kind of requirement had led us to invest massively on this technology, which brought us today to be a pioneer when it comes to the solution. And I'm glad to share with you today that we have already integrated PV, solar PV, with the water desalination. So we have a project in Jubail that is already 40 megawatt PV integrated to the water desal. Red Sea project in Saudi, we are doing 100% green water, which is basically all coming from the renewable. Definitely, this is something that is being developed in the last 15 years, 20 years, and now it is time to use it in other parts of the world. For your second question, definitely, we as a company, we are already present in Egypt. We have 3 projects in Bin, and we just achieved financial close of Komombo a few months ago. So we're already operating in the business on the solar PV, and we are looking at the wind. In Yom, initially, I recall they had a plan in that part to have a bridge between Egypt and Saudi to be built there. But I'm not following that project specifically, so I cannot comment on the progress there. But the idea was exactly how you mentioned it, is that utilizing the logistics part on both countries and in this source.
Constantine, I know you've got to leave us in a few minutes. Were there any thoughts that you had from an AIBP's perspective to the lady's question?
Well, I truly believe that there can be the 100% renewable solution to the today modern desalination technologies, and we are happy to support one of these projects in Saudi Arabia. So, and I wanted to learn more about the Suez Canal areas and what are the specific challenges for the deployment of the renewable energy. But AIB stands ready to support the decarbonization efforts in any region of any country. So. And we do have a strong appetite for energy transition in Egypt. As a last probably point I wanted to make is about what is the challenges, the most important one. And I wanted again to defer to the first panel at today's at the beginning of the annual meeting, and the subject of that is like private capital mobilization, and obviously all these numbers, and I had a variety of estimates from 2 trillion to 5 trillion a year in order to meet this challenging targets, and anywhere we are discussing it with the colleagues from the other MDBs, no matter how much more we will cooperate, and we have, no matter how many IFIs would work together, that would not be sufficient. So the private sector mobilization is the key for any success. Of course, the technologies should be developed, and the way how to attract the private sector. And in that regard, AIB is, we do have a lot of new products. We're looking at the scaling up of renewable development through the equity-like instruments to support the developers with to scale up their existing activities. We are also developing the infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure asset securitization, and it was mentioned today by the president. It's a very good example of that, the Bayfront in Singapore platform, which we were developing from the zero level together with the Clifford Capital. And it is already third issue, which issuance. And these are securitization of the commercial bank investments into the infrastructure. So what it gives them is the confidence in doing more of the green financing. And the Bayfront did agreed with us the decarbonization pathway through which they are working from one issuance to another issuance. And today, for our investment of across the 3 issuances of around $180 million, it's already close to $1 billion mobilization, and this is only beginning of that. So this is another way of how you could scale up the development. As the 2 examples, but we are also permanently thinking in that direction. This is the major challenge, really. Thank you.
Yeah, a step change in thinking. Thank you. Any more questions, gentlemen in the middle there?
Hamid Abdelal from Egypt, electrical engineer, working in the chemical field. Through listening to your explanations and through my study, I see that the volume of investments in hydrogen is very small, relating to in relation with the pollution caused by many fields of industries, especially in the in major industrialized countries. The other point is regarding to the law, as Harry said, as we have to يعني, facilitate the regulations which regulate the producing and I'm sorry, in production and export green hydrogen. Don't you think they should be facilitated or made more flexible? The last point, and I'm sorry for speaking so much, but the lack of the supported training programs, I think we need more of it to overcome this challenge of not training workforce. Thanks.
Okay, so maybe try to summarize that. I think that was around hydrogen or support for hydrogen, the financing and the policy that is driving the uptake of hydrogen. Would that be correct? Yeah. Well, I guess, Vahi, we can maybe come back to you here, but I guess the IRR in the US has driven this dramatically, and we've seen a lot of other nations and geographies have to react to try to keep up here. Would that be a fair assessment from your perspectives?
Yes, definitely. This is an extremely important point. And I think the second point, we have covered during the session that the key is the offtake. There will be difficult for developers to start building green hydrogen project without a serious offtake and the end user. At the end, power generation, it's going to the grid, water desalination is going to the homes, but where does the green hydrogen go? So the technology is still evolving, and the offtake is the key to get everyone around, from lenders, OEMs, developers, and all the stakeholders.
Vahi, have you seen in your field, in your environment, the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act?
I mean, I suppose just to sort of address that, and also the question in terms of flexibility around laws. I mean, unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that. And obviously, there's flexibility to the extent that it's secondary legislation. So, for example, in the EU, depending on the type of legislation, individual member states can implement that legislation at a domestic level, because they're able to under the way that the EU functions. And that does mean that there may be some slight differences between EU states. So, for example, Germany now has a new policy or a new announcement, a very recent announcement, and they've specifically referenced imports coming from the Middle East in terms of hydrogen and how they hope to secure those. And so whether that will mean there's a little bit more flexibility, perhaps it will, but it's only within the grounds of where they have that delegated authority. So there are certain requirements that there is no flexibility, but others they can. In terms of, what was the second point? Training and workforce, I think that's.
Yeah, we talked about the workforce a little bit, but yeah. Well, maybe Kishan, are there any views that you have?
You know, I mean, I think there's still a huge need for capacity development generally. So human resource capacity for sure, but across the board, even at the policy level, I mean, even just basic safety rules about hydrogen storage are not there in place in most of the countries in the region. Connecting to specific sectors, how the green hydrogen can be of use for, let's say, transport, expansion of fuel cell vehicles or fuel cell buses, hydrogen fuel cell buses, for example, or other specific sectors. So I think it's also a need to engage specific industry associations, actually, on ways that industry sector can connect to the green hydrogen expansion. Yeah, so I think, I mean, it would be great to have a MENA, in terms of the MENA region, I think it would make a lot of sense to have a regional center of excellence on green hydrogen to actually advance some of this stuff linked to the League of Arab States regional green hydrogen strategy that's about to be launched soon. I think it would make sense to also, for example, for Egypt to step up and maybe even propose to support such a thing and have the capacity built up for the region as a regional leader.
And maybe just to add as well, I mean, one of the things that the region has been reasonably successful in is on local contentisation over the years, ensuring that when there are new projects that there is a minimum percentage or there are targets throughout the duration of that project in terms of training and employment, so not just employment but training and employment of locals on the ground. And then the second aspect of that is local content, so where it makes sense, and it may not always make sense, but where it makes sense that there are local manufacturing facilities for the specific project or projects in the region. And of course that again would not just give employment but would also entail training as well.
Perfect. I think we've got time for one more question, sir. You've put your hand up very quickly. Oh.
I am Hani Muhammad from Electricity Transmission Company. My question for Mr. Kishan, when we try to increase the capacities from renewable, we have to phase out some of existing power plants. My question, who will pay the remaining balance of the existing loans for this thermal power plant? And the second question, what we can do with the huge amount of labor working in this thermal power plant? Thank you.
This is a very exciting question. Yes. I think I'm going to take this question to COP28. Or even before MENA Climate Week, even better. And 1 minute. But I think we also have, so I don't have the answer, unfortunately. But I think it's a very important one. This transition, especially because everybody's in a debt crisis also already. So. Yeah. It's very important. Yes. Yes.
We have a huge amount of the remaining value of these loans. What we can do, who will pay this amount?
I think our colleague has the answer.
I think, if you allow me, just to highlight a very interesting point came on Saudi Arabia as well on the same concept, right? So what happened in Saudi is that we have an old heavy crude oil assets that was supposed to run until 2030. And by 2030, it is required to be decommissioned. So the way that we looked at it is a bit different. So we said, okay, we would like to replace it with an existing asset of water desal. So the whole RFP of a new project, or let's say the negotiation with the off-taker, was we will decommission the existing asset. We will structure the new tariff while paying the capacity payment for the existing one. So the loans to the banks will still be paid. So that was called the Shaiba IWPP. So it was a win-win project between off-taker, developer, partners, and lenders. We still been able to build the new project, which is the water desalination project, in a very more competitive price that was allowing the government to benefit from it. Finally, the fuel saving that they were supposed to burn it on the project has been saved, which if you go and export it, it will save much more. So it is a win-win. They saved the oil, we produce the water, the lenders are happy, the off-takers are happy.
Okay. I think we could talk about this for hours, and hopefully this session has brought to the fore some of those points about the challenges, but also the opportunities within the energy transition within the region. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you, everybody, for joining.